Just ask questions. That was one of the most common responses to my recent article in the Plaid Horse about how confusing the horse world can be for new families. I agree, but the problem is when you're new to horses, you don't know what questions to ask. So today, I'm giving you 10 simple questions that can save you time, money, and stress during this next year as a horse mom. Welcome to Broke Horse Moms, the podcast for non-horsey horse moms who are figuring out this wild world of equestrian life together as we go. I'm your host, Angie Trueblood, and I did not grow up in this world either. I'm just a mom who started Googling things like what is a lead change 5 years ago, and I've never looked back. Okay, friend, let's get into it. Broke Horse Moms is presented by Big D's Tack and Vet Supply. Nobody told me about Big D's, but I am glad I found them. They have a huge selection, fast shipping, and the kind of customer service Broke Horse Moms appreciate. Use code BHM10 for 10% off your order at bigdweb.com. That's BIGDweb.com. So I recently wrote an article for the Plaid Horse called "The Biggest Barrier for Non-Horse Families Entering the Sport is Understanding," and I had no idea how much it would resonate. The Plaid Horse shared the article on their Facebook page, and it ended up sparking hundreds of comments from horse moms, maybe some trainers, and it seemed a good number of lifelong equestrians. Now, some people completely agreed with my perspective. One person saying, by the time I have figured out what's going on, my daughter is already in high school and the standards have changed. It is insane. Another person commented that the learning curve for this sport is insane. And someone phrased it, which I really like, the jargon overhead isn't talked about enough. So there was a lot of agreement that the understandability, or sometimes lack thereof, of this sport is definitely a hindrance to new families entering and progressing in it. There was a really interesting comment from what I presume to be an equine vet who said it's also a huge barrier for professionals entering the sport. I became a horse vet as a non-horse person nearly 30 years ago and was told to learn the language quickly or perish because it's ruthless and harsh. Horse people are not forgiving if you're not one of them. So that was not the most upbeat of comments, but I think brutal honesty, we're open to that here, right? There were a few people on that post who challenged the idea, and their perspective was sort of, it's not that complicated, just ask questions, which again, if we don't have any idea what questions to ask, that isn't really a helpful comment. I mean, I did engage with the post, so feel free to go over to the Plaid Horses Facebook page and look for the article that they posted. It was back on June 25th. Two of the comments, one of them said, "What on earth? At some point you learned what the word cleats mean. Pretty sure you can learn what the word breeches means. And if you don't know or understand something, ask." Okay, all right. Again, we're in an unfamiliar world, typically in unfamiliar surroundings, aka barns. And that is really not a helpful response. Honestly, like that attitude, I think, is what keeps many of us from asking questions. Someone else, which really kind of chapped me, said, "You think everyone knows what the heck a shin guard is, but you're overwhelmed by the need for paddock boots and half traps? Any sport has its own terminology and equipment, and none of them are universal." It's so funny because one of my girlfriends was headed to the barn last week, and now that Chloe is driving, she's always there without me, but I wanted to visit, so I caught a ride with my friend Carol, and I was telling her about this comment, and she laughed out loud because when we started this, of course, we didn't know what paddock boots were, but I don't think I even know what the term paddock meant back then. And then half chaps, she said, I mean, we both just pictured full on chaps that we had seen, I guess, like on TV. And she thought half chaps were just like covering the front of the leg, half of a chap. So to me, that comment proved my point exactly. Like the horse people think everything is so simple because they literally grew up knowing this language. Whereas to us, the simplest of terms is the most challenging. All in all, though, I don't disagree with the concept of asking questions. We absolutely should be asking questions. But after reading all of the comments, I realized the problem isn't that we're not asking enough questions. It's that no one tells us what are the right questions we should be asking. And not only do you not know the right questions to ask, you don't know who to ask. You don't know that there are options outside of your trainer to start learning and becoming more familiar with this new world. So that's what today's episode is going to tackle. I am sharing with you not everything that you need to know about horses, because I would definitely not recommend that lesson coming from me, but instead, I'm going to offer you, let's not even call them questions. Let's call them conversation starters that you can ask over the course of the next year that is going to start to help build your horse knowledge one conversation at a time. Because the goal is not to become an expert overnight. It's just to feel a little less overwhelmed today than you did yesterday. And these questions apply no matter how much time you have spent in the sport, whether you started in it 6 months ago or you have been in the sport 7+ years. They are all applicable and will help take you one step forward in your learning and feeling more comfortable in this world that we have entered. Now, as we dig into the questions, I think it's important to recognize that not every question needs to be asked to your trainer. Remember in episode 22, we had a conversation with Jen and Karen from the Scope podcast about who decides what types of decisions in that parent-trainer partnership. And Jen specifically said, it's not ideal to, pepper the trainer with questions as they're coming out of the ring on a night that they're giving lessons or at a show, right? Not only do you need to pick the right time to ask a trainer the questions, you also probably need to diversify who you're asking. One, just not to overwhelm the trainer, but two, to get a variety and a diversity of perspective, because what your trainer responds as an answer may not be the same thing that a fellow horse mom would give you. So definitely use these questions and ask different people, which begs the question, who are the people, Angie? We'll go over a couple here, but I highly encourage you to listen to episode 15, How to Build Your Broke Horse Mom Village, which is really important if you're starting out in the sport, right? If you don't already kind of have your network of go-to people. Now, for the questions that we're going to go over, you can definitely ask some of the questions at a tack shop. If you have a local tack shop, typically that is one of the best resources that you can go to ask really logistic and tactical questions about what you and your kiddo might need. Definitely ask an experienced horse mom. You can either find one at your barn or find one at a show, but latch on, get her number if you feel like she knows what's up and you can keep in touch with her. And likely she will love to pass on the, limited. I say that because I feel like any knowledge I acquire in the sport is still always going to be limited compared to people who grew up in it. But it's all relative, right? The mom who has had a kid riding for 5 years is going to know more than the mom who has had a kid riding for 1 year. You can also ask folks at your barn if there's a barn manager. That might be someone to kind of tap into as a resource. Often at barns, you can tell that there's either an adult or an older kid who has a lot more experience than some of the others, might be there a little more often than some of the others. So ask them, like, hey, can you be a resource for me when I have questions? Again, most people in this sport are really open to having their brains picked and being a resource because they're passionate about horses and they want people to love them as much as they do. And then the other thing, I would be remiss if I didn't mention podcasts, but there are a lot of resources available both on podcasts. There are some great Facebook groups and online communities where you can ask questions and get those answered quite quickly by folks who have been there and done that. Reddit is another really great place to look. So I highly encourage you to kind of take the bull by the horns in a bit of figuring out who it is that you can go to ask some questions, because your trainer doesn't have to be and really shouldn't be your only source of information. So let's dig in to the 10 questions that you can ask over the course of the next year. We don't need to bombard our brains, but that will help move you a step towards becoming a more broke horse mom. And I'm not talking financially. First question, what's okay to buy used and what should always be new? I think this can often be a trainer question. It can often also be a question to ask at the tack shop. And this is very relative to the stage of the sport that you are in. So if you're at the tack shop, you're going to probably need to give them a little bit more perspective about what you have coming up over the next couple of months and what you're thinking might be purchases that you're going to make. And then they can give you an idea of, oh, okay, if you're going to buy a helmet, you want to buy that new, or maybe you're further along and you need some, I don't know what they're called, leg wraps for traveling, right? They may say, yeah, you can totally get those used. So that's the first question. Similarly in scope is asking people at the barn, at horse shows, where is the nearest tack shop and consignment store that you love? I highly recommend asking both. I think a lot of times we ask for tack shops, and it took me a really long time to even realize that a consignment shop existed with horse stuff. So ask in your local community where those two things are. You'll want to ask, it might be your trainer, most likely, but you could still also get away with this by someone experienced at the barn or at the tack shop. What types of supplies will we need for the upcoming season? If summer is upon us, there's fly sprays, there might be fly masks, other things that the horses might need. Same thing for the kiddos. But asking that question as it pertains to the time of year that you're in. And if you're traveling, think about it. What will I need to travel in the summer versus travel in the winter? So what supplies will we need for the upcoming season? Number 4, and this is kind of going into really the trainer perspective, asking, what should my child be practicing between lessons? Now, this is like a fine line to walk as a parent, because depending on the age of your kiddo, they may not really be open to you offering advice to them, especially if they're a teenager. When they're younger, for sure. Like I know when Chloe first started riding, her first trainer, no, I think it was our current trainer, when she moved to her barn, her ankles, like she couldn't keep her heels down. And so she had her at home stretching her heels on the steps. But knowing that, like, what should my kiddo be doing between lessons? It can be things off the horse. It could be things on the horse. And depending on the stage that your kiddo is in, you can figure out how to share that with them. Or just by opening that conversation up with the trainer, it might proactively encourage the trainer to share that with your kiddo. But what should they be doing between lessons to practice and progress? And then similarly, number 5, how do I know if my child is progressing? Because often it all looks the same. I know if I were to take a snapshot of Chloe riding 4 years ago, it would look very different than it looks today. But if I took a snapshot of her riding 3 months ago, I don't know if it would look terribly different than it does today, right? So you as a mom and a parent having some way to judge, are they progressing? And sometimes that question, it kind of opens the doors for larger conversations, but it's a great question to ask the trainer so that you feel involved and somewhat knowledgeable in a sport that we often don't feel that way. And then I think one great question for the trainer is, what's the best way for you to play the role as the parent and support your kid without getting in the way? I think from a lot of recent conversations that we've had on the podcast, including the one with David Reichert from UDJC, There's been a lot of online chatter about the role that parents play, which is often super annoying to me because it really is just putting this stereotype on moms specifically of being like total pains in the butt and just overprotective and over involved. And we just want to know how to support our kids. And so we don't know how to do that at a barn, right? Depending on how the barn is set up, you're literally sitting often ringside. So you see the entire lesson, which is very different than other sports that my kids have played. Like, I don't stay at lacrosse practice, right? So asking that trainer, how can I support my kid in a way that doesn't impede what you're trying to accomplish? Like, I respect you, trainer, and I don't want to get in your way. And having that conversation up front is really helpful. But I think too, as your kiddo goes through different stages, like for me now with Chloe driving, now I'm kind of recalibrating, like, how can I support her? Maybe not without getting in the way, but not impeding on her independence, and maybe that's just going to the lessons and not always hanging out at the barn, which I am not, which is so sad. Anywho, that's a different episode, my friend. And then I would say the last thing to ask the trainer, well, not necessarily, but what's one sign that my kid is ready to do the next thing? So no matter what stage your kid is in, there's something that comes next, whether that is when do we add another lesson to the schedule, or when do we start showing? When do we start thinking about leasing a horse, buying a horse, getting a different horse? Whatever that next thing is at your barn for the stage that your kid is in, what's a sign that my kid is ready for that? I know one of my girlfriends, her kiddos ride at a beginner lesson barn, but they've got 2 rings, and kids start off taking lessons in the little ring, and eventually they move up as kind of a rite of passage to the big ring. When are they going to be ready for that? Like, what's expected of them? And then also, I think including the kid in that conversation so that they know. If that's not something the kid knows the answer to, then looping them in either in that conversation with the trainer or back at home, I think is really important. Like, you want them to have skin in the game and you want them to feel like they're a part of this sport that they're participating in. Number 8, is there someone at the barn who is a good person to ask beginner questions? I can bet you if you ask your trainer this, they might hug you so that they are not carrying the weight of kind of onboarding and educating every new family. Proactively finding out who are the people that I should go to within this barn family to ask these types of questions, it's priceless. It's super helpful for the trainer and also super helpful for you and your kiddo so that you can kind of integrate into the culture of the barn and the community of the barn more quickly. Now, number 9 is a question that you can ask to anyone. What is a website, book, or podcast that every horse mom should read, look at, subscribe to, listen to, whatever? But if you're ever just having casual, random conversations at a horse show because you're there for 5,000 hours and you're certainly going to be talking to strangers, if there's someone that seems pretty well educated in the space, just ask them, like, how did you learn all of this? Is there a book that you read? Is there something that you can recommend as a resource? Obviously, they will recommend the Broke Horse Moms podcast, and you should do that for your friends too to pay it forward. But I have had other people at barns give me a book. There's a great book that I can't remember the name of it because I didn't actually read it, but it's amazing. It talks about the horse rider relationship. And then one of my friends' wives works with my husband, and she has sent a whole stack of like beginner horse books home to me. This just reiterates that horse people love sharing their love and knowledge of the sport. You do just need to ask them, right? But we need to have a question to ask them. And then lastly, this is something that requires a little bit more planning and maybe stepping outside of your comfort zone a little bit more. But it was a couple of the experiences that I remember being very eye-opening. Asking the barn manager or the trainer or the owner of the barn Is there a way that we could plan to be at the barn when the farrier comes or when the vet comes? And obviously not in emergency situations, but me being able to see the other people that care for horses and giving me sort of a larger window into this space has been really impactful in recognizing all that goes into caring for these animals. I remember very early on being at the barn where one of the horses had to get x-rays. And then there was another horse. I forget exactly what was happening. It might have been x-rays, but I feel like they had to get sedated a little bit to get the type of x-ray. I might be mixing that up. But I just remember seeing x-rays taken and seeing a horse needing to be sedated to do some kind of check was very interesting. And then being at the barn when the farrier was there was just wild. Like watching a farrier, it is probably the last equine job that I would ever want. Mad respect for farriers, but it was really interesting as a new horse mom who had never seen any of that, like a horse getting shoed. I would just ask your trainer or the barn manager, like, hey, is there a time when they come out where I could just be here and not get in the way, not even ask questions, but just kind of observe? So, those are the 10 questions that I think if you ask over the course of the next year, for sure, no matter what stage you are in, it is going to move you a little bit more forward, right? You don't have to ask all the questions tomorrow, just one, because the goal is not for us to learn everything. We are never going to learn everything about this sport, but we want to start taking baby steps into learning more than we did yesterday. I would love to hear from you if you actually go and ask one of these questions and share with me what was the response. Was it eye-opening? Was it helpful? You can share that response with me directly on our SpeakPipe page, which is the place that you can leave a voicemail message. You can go to speakpipe.com/BHM. The link to that will be in the show notes, but I appreciate those of you that have already left me messages. It's been so rewarding to hear your voice and your story, but I hope that these 10 questions have been super helpful. I'm going to include them in our newsletter. So if you are not signed up for the Broke Horse Moms newsletter, definitely go do that. brokehorsemoms.com/newsletter. You can sign up for that today and you will get access to today's email. But also if you listen to this not on the day that it was released, you can still sign up and then get access to all of our previous newsletters and catch the questions. All right. Well, I will talk to you in a couple of weeks, my friend. But until then, be well. That's it for this episode of Broke Horse Moms. Thank you so much for being here with me today. If you'd like to follow along, you can join us over on Instagram at Broke Horse Moms and see some of our behind the scenes shenanigans. And if you know another mom who suddenly found herself learning the horse world alongside her kid, please send this episode her way. The more horse moms we have figuring this out together, the better. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, give your rider a hug, if they actually let you, and take a deep breath, mama. You're doing great. Special thanks to our podcast editor and friend, Steve Woodward, who helps make sense of my rambling episodes and gives you the best audio experience possible. If you're thinking about starting a podcast and want his ears on your project, check him out at podcastingeditor.com.